Hello everyone. Today's interesting topic is cleft in the upper lip, exactly in the midline. It is also called hair lip. There is a gap exactly in the midline for the hair. H-A-R-E. Hair means rabbit. Exactly in the midline it will be there. So if a human lip has got a gap exactly in the midline, we call it as hair lip or median cleft lip. In order to understand this, first we have to know that there is a process coming from above, the developing brain, it's growing downwards. It is called frontonasal process. It is really broad initially. Later, the maxillary process pushes the lower part of the frontonasal process and narrows it down. So upper part is broad and lower part becomes narrow thanks to the medial word pushing of the maxillary process. So the lowermost end of the frontonasal process develops two pits. It's called the nasal pit. Two holes will come here. It's called the nasal pit. Because of the formation of the nasal pit, the lower end of the frontonasal process will now have two elevations on either sides. So, because of the pit, there are two elevations on either side of the pit. This elevation is called as medial nasal process, whereas this is called as lateral nasal process. So there are two medial nasal process and two lateral nasal process. Medial nasal process is medial to the nasal pit. Lateral nasal process is lateral to the nasal pit. So once this maxillary process is pushing it like this, the medial nasal processes will approximate with one another. When they approximate with one another, it forms nasal septum, this midline structure. This medial nasal process which fuses with one another to give rise to nasal septum also gives a grape-like extension. It's called globular swellings. So these globular swellings will come downwards and they fuse with one another to give rise to this part of the upper lip. The middle part of the upper lip, the depressed part of the upper lip is called as a philtrum of the upper lip. So where it is developed from? The philtrum of the upper lip is developed by the globular swellings of medial nasal process of frontonasal process. So this frontonasal process, lowermost end, will develop two nasal pits. There is a formation of medial and lateral nasal process. Medial nasal process will unite with one another to form the nasal septum. Then the lowermost end of the medial nasal process gives a grape-like extension called the globular swellings. These globular swellings fuse with one another to give rise to the philtrum of the upper lip. So that is a formation of the philtrum of the upper lip. The remaining portion of the upper lip is formed by the maxillary process. Imagine if these two globular swellings does not unite with one another, that will result in the formation of a gap in the midline, median cleft lip, also called hair lip, H-A-R-E, because it is present in the hair or the rabbit.